Libya's two main rival leaders agreed to a conditional ceasefire and to hold elections early next year. The country's UN-backed Prime Minister, Fayez al-Sarraj, and his rival, the military commander, Khalifa Haftar, made the announcement after talks in Paris on Tuesday. Well, Libya's been in turmoil since its former leader, Colonel Gaddafi, was ousted in 2011. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Mustafa Fetouri. He's in the Libyan capital, Tripoli, and he's an academic and an analyst. Thanks ever so much for coming on the programme. So, 24 hours on since the agreement was signed, what's the feeling there? Do people really believe that this ceasefire will hold?
Well, actually, first of all, thank you for having me. The other thing is, there's too much of talk about a ceasefire, like if there is a war going on inside the country. There is no fighting going on for quite some time, at least in most parts of Libya, you know, other than the sporadic little wars here and there, which is committed mostly by militias, you know, fighting for domination and control. Except in eastern Libya, where there's still a fight against the so-called terror groups, and those are exempted from any ceasefire anyway. So it's just too much talk about the ceasefire. In fact, there's no fire to be seized anyway. So
they've also committed to elections. Do you think Libya's ready for an election?
Well, that's the tricky point. I personally doubt it. You know, if there is a possibility for election by next year, as proposed by next spring, actually in March. First, Mr. Sarraj proposed the idea about 10 days ago, and then he and Mr. Haftar reaffirmed the same thing. Their commitment to organizing elections and their meeting in Paris yesterday. The problem is the government, you know, in Tripoli, if you like, the government of national accord, headed by Mr. Sarraj, lacks any effective power all over the country. And the country is effectively is divided between two governments, one based in Tobruk, which is backing Mr. Haftar, Field Marshal Haftar, and the one based in Tripoli, which is brokered by the United Nations after the Libyan political agreement was signed in 2015. The problem is, if you have the mechanism, if they have the mechanisms probably to organize elections, maybe in Western Libya, the question remains if they have the same mechanism to do the same thing in Eastern Libya, which has been like an independent state, if you like, for the last couple of years. I'm not really sure. That's one thing. The other thing is, even if they can overcome the problems of logistics and organizational issues, they still have to face the more protracted problem of the security situation inside the country itself, especially in Western Libya, where there are so many armed groups, whether militias and criminals and so on and so forth. And some of those people are claiming the legitimacy of the government of Mr. Sarraj, that they are part of Mr. Sarraj's government, but that's not the truth. You know, Mr. Sarraj can hardly control them, and we have seen last May, after a similar meeting in Abu Dhabi, you know, a terrible accident took place, whereby government forces, or claiming to be part of the government forces in Tripoli, attacked a base in southern Libya, controlled by Mr. Haftar's soldiers, and killed around 140 people. So it's quite a tricky situation.
It is a tricky situation. Well, thanks very much for your insight, though, Mustafa Fetouri in Tripoli.